Hallelujah. I count it a privilege this morning to be standing here, and I do not take it for granted. It's been, when I was making this slide, it brought a lot of memory because I spent the entire of my teenage year to early adulthood in trauma. And it took me years to actually heal from that trauma. And I am here this morning to share my healing story and how I got to where I am now, living a happy life and building a beautiful family with my beautiful and amazing husband and three wonderful children. I am grateful to God. I want to acknowledge my mommy, Mommy Ada Iboji. You know, it's been a tussle for us to maintain this relationship. And then I'm glad that she understands where I was coming from. And Otito actually touched some of those things. And then I'm going to be sharing that experience. I also want to acknowledge Daddy and Mommy Elesho. Thank you so much for coming. And Ma permit me to recognize two of my friends, Pastor Mary Paul and then Sister Stephanie. Thank you so much. Those are my support system. Thank you so much. So without wasting too much of time, I'm going to be talking on breaking the cycle of emotional and sexual abuse. Otito, as if she's slide into my slide. I was like, oh, you saw my slide and then you were just saying everything in my slide. And the thing is that I was given 30 minutes. I've been like wondering how I'm going to spend 30 minutes talking on this. So she has simplified some of my slide. So I'm not going to be repeating some of the things that are already in my slide. So what I'm going to be focusing on is how to build a strong family system to prevent the cycle of trauma, especially emotional and sexual abuse. Because when we talk about sexual abuse, it's a very difficult topic that I really don't like talking about. Because you see, when you have not experienced sexual abuse, it's easier for you to look at the people and say, is it more than just rape? Is it more than sexual assault? And what I usually tell people is that, please, if you don't understand a thing, honestly, it's better you just keep quiet and don't talk about it. And I'm going to share with the story of a young girl that walked into my office 4 years ago. She was a very beautiful young girl, very beautiful. And when she came to the office, I was just admiring her beauty. And I was smiling, and as I was smiling, she became so withdrawn. So we had the first session, and as she was going, I said, has anybody told you this today you look beautiful? And I saw she was scared. So I pretended as if I didn't see that. Then the following day, intentionally, the following session when she came in, intentionally I looked at her and I said, you look beautiful. And then she almost ran out of the office. Then so I didn't talk about it. Then the third session when she came, as we finished, I looked at her, I said, you look beautiful. And then she was almost entering under the table. And then I asked her this question, what does it mean to be beautiful? And then she just broke down and started crying. She was just 21 and she was really beautiful. She's a kind of girl that when you see, you want to see her again. So I asked her, tell me the story of your life. And then she lost her mom. She said she lost her mom at a very tender age. And then she looked exactly like her mom. Then when she was about 8 or 9 or thereabout, the father would come to her room, rub her body and tell her you look beautiful. And she thought that was normal because it was her father. And then the father kept rubbing her until she became 12 years old. And then the father would tell her you look beautiful. And then the father would rape the girl. And this continued until the girl was 17. And then one day the father got drunk, brought his friends home. And then the friends looked at her and said, you look beautiful. And 5 of his father's friends took turn and then they raped her. So for her, being beautiful means what? Rape. And so sometimes when you talk to people and you really don't realize or understand where they are coming from. I'm sure a lot of people have told this beautiful young girl she looks beautiful, and then she reacts in a negative way. And then, because people were mini making machine, I know people must have judged this beautiful girl. And then I had to run the through. Please, I'm already on the next slide. And I want to start with this introduction. The circle of abuse is very ruthless. Very ruthless, because, one thing about abuse is that you know the beginning, but you never can tell how the effect. One thing about abuse is that it will not only affect the person, it affects every other person around the person. So, when I was a child, I thought I was born with both asthma and pneumonia. So I was a sick child. Very sick as a child. I didn't know how to bathe with cold water. I didn't know how to drink cold water or ordinary water. The first 12 years of my life, I was used to bathing with hot water, and I was used to taking hot water. So I have limited friends because I cannot play with the sun. So maybe naturally, I wasn't even an introverted child. Because you see, trauma when a person experiences trauma, it becomes the personality of that person. So maybe that journey of my life, and my mother too did not help me. She wasn't wicked. I have an amazing mother, even though she was late now. And so they always prevented me from people. So I didn't know how to relate as a child. Then one day, my father wasn't always at home. I was raised by an absent father. Absent emotionally, physically, financially, in all aspects of a child's life. That was the kind of father that I had growing up. So, one day I was going to JSS1. My dad just came home. I was the sixth child of 7 children. All my elderly ones were day students. Then my dad came home and said I was going to the boarding school. And my mom was there. She was the one that was always at home. So at that point, I expected my mom should stand up for me and say, there wasn't any reason why this girl should actually go to the boarding school. But my mom was quiet, and I was taken to the boarding school. So when I got to the boarding school, I have never had my bath with cold water. I didn't even know how to. So for 3 weeks of being in school, I didn't have my bath. It was then I learned how to do rub and shine. And then the first day, I couldn't bear it. I had to have my bath. And as expected, I had serious crisis. That time, there was no phone. I'm talking about 1992, so there was no phone. And I was in the hospital 3 days. The 4th day, my dad came because it was very close to where I was. At that time, I was already in the hospital. And my dad looked at me. My friends were there. My house mistress, they were there around me. And my dad looked at me and told them that the next time they will call him to come and check me should be that they were calling him to come and carry my dead body. I'm talking about my biological father. He was one because we confirmed that. So I'm not talking about my guardian. You see, sometimes when I'm talking to young people and they are talking about their parents, this guardian did this, and sometimes they think they are missing something from their real parents. Sometimes you are not really missing anything. And my dad, my friends were there, and that coming out from your own biological father, that broke me. And that was the last time I let my pain out. So I mastered my pain, and I started internalizing my pain. So when I'm having asthma attack or when I'm having pneumonia attack, I pretend and I hide under my pillow. And so when I got to SS1, I started smoking because I just wanted to end it all. All of these, because I knew what my mom was passing through. So I didn't want to come back home and add to her, and I hid that. So when we talk about the circle of abuse, it's ruthless and it destroys. Tito was asking what was the definition of trauma. And it was my pain that gave me this definition of trauma. Trauma simply means injury to the heart. Trauma is what? Injury to the heart, because it's not something you can explain, and it's not something people can understand when you are traumatized. So a small child nourished with nothing but violence isn't aware that there's another way of living. And growing up in a household where they are continually subjected to criticism and harsh punishment tears apart the very essence of a person. It shreds them apart until they are what? Barely clinging to a frail thread of life. That was exactly the summary of my life when I was growing up. So, you see, when a child is emotionally, physically, or sexually abused, it not only damages the child, but it damages the offspring of that child. And that is true. When the first speaker was talking about the type of trauma, she mentioned something, generational trauma. I was in a church in Abuja 2 Saturdays ago, and I was talking to parents. And a friend that came to pick me at the car park, she asked me this question. She said, why is it that most of us will please people? You know, there are little things that we do at the home front, and we really don't understand the implication of those things on our children. For those of us who are guilty of this is how we raise people-pleasing children. Your house is dirty, not well organized. Then the visitor is coming, they call you on phone, and you compel your children to start arranging your home. Because a visitor is coming, you are raising people-pleasing children. Oh, there is no food at home. Then one of your secondary school friends called you from Abuja or from Lagos, and they said they will be coming home. Your children, they have not eaten meat for days. And then the children saw that because your friends are coming, you are going out to borrow money to feed your friend at the detriment of your family. You are raising traumatized children who will not mind wounding themselves at the detriment of other people. You see, there are a lot. And I'm going to be focusing on building healthy family system, because until we focus on building healthy family system, you are not going to understand how to break the circle of emotional and sexual abuse. I finished my secondary school in July. And when I came home, all my siblings weren't at home. My younger sister was with my dad, so I was home with my mom. And when I finished, and I asked her a question, I said, why do you allow my dad? Because the thing pained me. Because I struggled all through the secondary school. If you say struggle, so academically I wasn't a dull child. But I was traumatized. Because I felt that they took my mom away from me because she was my pillar. And nobody explained why I should be taken to boarding school. I know some of you are wondering and said, what is the big deal about going to boarding school? For me, it was. You see, trauma is very peculiar. Very peculiar. Somebody may lose every member of the family and the person is fine. Somebody will lose their chicken in the family and that person is traumatized for the rest of their life. So when I came, I knew my mom wasn't happy in the marriage, yes. But she stood because there was no support. So she stood. I finished in July, and then in January following year, on the 17th of January, my mom passed. And this was the same mom who raised us to love God. And at that point, I told myself I was going to stop serving God. Because I couldn't comprehend how somebody who loved God, how my mom loved the Lord. She was a Christian, a very good Christian. And then she died. How? And see, for those of us who are believers, when we go to people that are grieving, sometimes it's good to be quiet. You see, pastors were coming and they are telling us the story of Job. And I was like, am I Job? I wasn't Job. So don't compare me with a Job. I don't want to hear the story of a Job. I wasn't afraid that my mom was going to die. Job was afraid. And the Bible said that the things he feared most finally, so I wasn't Job. I didn't want to hear the story of Job. But nobody cared to listen. And then for like 5 years, I stopped serving God because I didn't see the reason why God that says that I love you would take the person that I value most. Who was there? My dad wasn't there. And those were those were my thoughts. Nobody knew I wasn't serving God because I grew up in a Baptist. So if you go through Sunbeam, you will know memory verse as of Sunbeam. So as at the time when I was 10, I could memorize about 500 Bible verses. So because I could quote Bible verses, people thought I was in Christ. I wasn't in. I was totally lost. So when a child is emotionally, physically, or sexually abused, it not only damages the child, but it damages the offering of that child. It damages other members of the child's family, particularly his or her own siblings. The same holds true of spousal abuse. When a man beats his wife, he is also damaging his children and his children's children. The same is true when one partner emotionally abuses his or her spouse in front of his children. You know, for women who are going through emotional abuse, I don't support divorce. But sometimes it's good to just separate for a while because you see the children you think you were staying in the marriage for their sake, you are damaging them. My mom stayed. She would have left a long time ago, but she chose to stay in the marriage. But she thought she stood for us, but we were all damaged. Because all of us, when I started my healing journey, I had to take all my siblings through this journey of healing. It was then all of them realized that they suppressed their trauma. So, if you are staying in that marriage thinking that you are staying for your children, honestly, you are damaging that children. Okay, so why are we saying all of this? Please go back. Not front, go back. The slide before this one. You see, why am I focusing on family? Because family is the production factory of the society. When you see a damaged or a hurting society, have it at the back of your mind that a lot of family are damaged. And I can boldly say, because I've had interaction with I've done therapy for over 200 couples. And in my assessment, there's what we call ACEs, that's adverse childhood experiences. And there's also trauma impact assessment that I do for them. And there's also this attachment style. By the time I do these three are the elements, are the assessment that you can do to know whether an individual is actually traumatized. And out of I was checking this morning, about 212 couples that I have worked with, about 175 of them actually have what we call adverse childhood experiences. And then the trauma, that's what we call the meta-emotion, is always very high. And what that is telling us is that, when we talk about family, what makes up a family? The father and the mother, right? And this is a question I always ask parents. I said, who taught you about parenting? Can you answer? For those of us who are parents, who taught us about parenting? Chorus answer. Who taught your parent about parenting? Who taught your parent about parenting? Their parent. So who taught your parent about parenting? And I also want to ask, the way we parent your children, 65 or 70% of them are the way, what makes up the human being? 95% of who you are is the subconscious mind, the one that you don't even have knowledge about. The you that you know is just about 5%. So sometimes when you see someone who is fair, guys, when you see, even all of us, when you see people that are very fair, we tend to label them as what? Prostitute, right? And then we say these ones are promiscuous. How did we come about that? And then if you see someone who is macho, and then you are saying this person looks wicked. All of those things are the things that, we just assume. Everything we just assume. And then, so when a guy sees a beautiful fair lady that he likes, instead of him approaching that fair lady, he's looking at it in his mind that, this one will never be faithful. How did we come about that? I'm making all of these analogies so that we will understand how we actually generate or maybe acquire trauma. How many of us used to shout at our children? Let's be sincere. Because even me too, I used to shout. Okay. How do you learn how to shout? But in the real sense of it, has shouting actually been a means of correcting children? In fact, the Gen Z shout at them, and then they are looking at you like, I'm not sure this mom is okay. And they are looking at you like, you are not okay. But you see, it's not something you are doing consciously. But those are the elements and the things that we picked up. Sometimes you pretend. And then you are learning where you pretend from. Go back. Sometimes I want all of us to begin to travel back. Look at the way you have been parenting your children. I have 10 more minutes. I know. Look at the way you have been parenting your children and ask yourself, have you been getting results? And how do you come about all of those things? Let's look at some basic fundamental truths. Every society started with a family. The source of every national problem is the family because that is the production factory. The quality of our family determines the quality of the society, and ultimately, I've said all of those things because of our time. Okay, just keep going. See, trauma, let me tell you how trauma is passed. Trauma in a person decontextualizes over time and looks like a personality. So, you see, at the root of drug addiction are what? Element of traumatic childhood experiences. So, sometimes when people react, people will not, if I just come now, I carry this laptop, I begin to, mash everything here. That is the behavior, my action that you are seeing. And then you begin to judge people. You have forgotten that for every action, there is a thought that brought about how the person feels that resulted in the way the person actually reacts. And that is how trauma is. So when trauma, is one person that is traumatized, then it becomes the personality. Like trauma has a lot of faces: withdrawn, procrastination, and a whole lot. All of those things becomes your personality. Then when you now carry that personality of that trauma person, you now join it with another person. What do you begin to do? You begin to pass that your personality on that person, then it becomes your family trait. And that is why, when I was growing up in the Yoruba culture, before you will go and marry in another family, they want to know if they have mental illness. They want to know if the people in that marriage, they actually stay in the home and stay married. The reason why they are checking, we used to call it generational causes. But we cannot understand where all of these traits are coming from. They are just like, you know, the way ants will follow. And then they will form a long line until what? They begin to build the hills. Ant hills. And what? They make that place abode. That is how trauma is. So, when these people, you know, when the trauma in a family becomes a family trait, it now becomes trauma in people. Then that trauma in people will look like what? It becomes a culture. And that is why they will say this family, they have anger issue. It's not about the anger issue in the family. It's about where the anger was generated from. So, you see, those who come from abusive or neglectful background are generally, now when I'm doing premarital counseling, I really don't do it, but sometimes people that are very close to me, when I'm doing premarital counseling, I have added trauma impact assessment, I have added attachment style, I have added AC, so that you are not going to destroy another person. If I had not married the kind of husband that I married, maybe I would have left my marriage. Because I carried all my baggages. I didn't heal from that trauma. And I put it on my husband. But my husband is a very quiet, patient, loving, amazing man. He absorbed all of them. And in the marriage, we walked through my healing process until I became finally healed. So sometimes, if I had married another traumatized man, and you see, when husband and wife begin to fight in a marriage, it's not about them. Sometimes they are just helpless. I'm not justifying the reason why you should be emotionally I didn't abuse my husband emotionally. I knew because my kind of courtship was different. I knew the family I came from. So some of the things I didn't want to see, I didn't really do more of going to restaurant, watching movie. I'm not even that kind of person. But I love fun. So some of the things we talk about my husband were my traumatic experience and how not to raise another traumatized children. So we talk about finances, we talk about when your in-law comes, we talk about so many things. You see, the true meaning of trauma is from the Greek word, and it means wound. Okay? So when you are, the same way we have the wound in the physical wound, when let's say you are beaten by a dog, and then you refuse to treat it, what happens? Tetanus will enter, and then all of those things. And that is exactly what happens to trauma heart. So, because you leave it for a longer time, we have emotional tetanus that we begin to pray and eat on that emotional wound. And all of that, you see, anything you see, when somebody even does something to you, because your heart is already wounded, you begin to repel. So what was happening to me was, I have nice people around me. I could be very nice with people around me. But I don't allow people to get close to me because I don't want to lose people that are close to me. Because the year my mom died in January, then I lost 3 of my good friends in the space of 6 weeks. So I became withdrawn. So once I see you are getting too close to me, you will see me, I will pick race. I saw it was becoming a pattern. She has already talked about emotional abuse. So, what do we call adverse childhood experiences? Those are childhood experiences, the things that we go through as a child that are impacting us. And what brought about this adverse childhood experience experiment? The man that brought about the 10 questions, I've been able to now divide it into like 25 questions now for my clients. The man realizes that he was a psychologist, a psychiatrist. That's a doctor of the brain. No, neuro. That's a psychiatric doctor. So he realized that people that were coming traumatized, all of them were obese. And then They will come, they will treat them, they are getting fine, and then by the time he goes back to check up on them, maybe they come for checkup, he will realize that they were very obese. And that was when he now started doing the experiment and started going through, doing experiment on all of the clients. And he now realized that they were getting fat because they were sexually harassing them. So once they become fat, they become less attractive to their abusers. So the way of escaping that traumatic experience was to be becoming fat. So he listed all the elements. There were 10 questions asked about if you are physically abused, emotionally abused, sexually abused. He realized that some of them were physically abused. He now related all of them. So childhood experiences are powerful determinants of who we become as an adult. Please just keep going. So there are some, I'll just talk about the myths then. We'll talk about how we can break the cycle. Trauma is uncommon. That's a myth. I will not have time to because they are simple. Trauma heals all wounds. Those are all myths. Trauma survivors are damaged or broken. That's a lie. Okay? I said earlier that trauma has so many faces. Those are some of the faces. Procrastination. Sometimes people procrastinate because they don't want to experience something. So not feeling good enough, especially those who are emotionally and verbally abused. There's a mistake that parents will make. When your child, let's say you have a child who is always dropping this here every time, and you are always correcting it. We always make the mistake of the day the child puts that in a right place, we don't talk about it. And so, what you are doing indirectly is that people are quick to see your bad behavior. So we don't praise good behavior all the time. It is a very traumatic experience. Why am I saying all of this? Is because when I'm talking to people that are even married 15 years, you will see them relaying that experience. And that is why when their wives or their husband are always picking on the thing they are doing wrongly, they are always on the defensive. Can nothing good come out of Nazareth? Common faces of trauma, anger. So sometimes I don't get angry when people behave in a certain way because I've written 2 papers now on trauma that have been published internationally. And when people behave in a certain way, I have compassion on them. When the Bible said that be ye perfect as your heavenly, I went to the etymology of this verse, the true meaning. It wasn't perfect. It was saying, be ye compassionate, even as your heavenly Father is compassionate. So God wants us to what? To have compassion towards everybody that we see. I have told myself that I will not be part of the people that will add salt to people's injury. Anybody that will encounter me in this life, we encounter peace and kindness. And I am consciously living that. So when people encounter you, what do they encounter? But the thing is that a traumatized person, an injured person, will keep injuring people. So, you see, revenge is also a common reaction to trauma. Belief, numbness. When people lose their loved ones, sometimes they become numb. That is an effect of grief. Please, at that point when they are numb, what they need is for us to hold them. Pray for them. Don't talk at that time. Please. I don't know if it's an African thing. When people are grieving, we love to talk. But really, the people that have grieved in the time past, so one of the things they don't want is for people to talk. They just want you to touch and understand and be quiet with them sometimes. You see, trauma knows no boundary. My 10 minutes is out. I'm rounding up now. Regardless of what, demographic, age, race, borders, culture, gender, and status. Okay? Just go to the last slide. There was a video I was supposed to play. You see, at the root of every traumatized society is a traumatized family system. And so, for me, How did I start healing? I was on the bed. I think I was in, because those period, along the line, I have series of sexual abuse, along the line between ages 17 and 19. So, and then when that issue of the abuse happened, my siblings were my great support system. We are very close. So my father didn't know about my abuse until April this year. So when we got to the church and we narrated, do you know what the church told us? They said, if I had prayed enough, that wouldn't have happened. And I just shut down. And for 2 years, I became numb. Numb, like not even good money to my siblings. I didn't talk for 2 good years. And then one of the nurses that was taking care of me, we just come and begin to read the story of Jesus. Sorry, in 5 minutes I will round up. And then when she comes, she will just read the story of Jesus. And because I was groomed and I was well grounded in the scripture, one day I just stood up after 2 years. Because sometimes they'll take me to the hospital, I'll be there 2 months, they bring me back. Nobody knew because I wasn't talking. So I sat down there. And then the scripture came to my heart. He was wounded for our sake. He was bruised. And then I began to look at all the things Jesus Christ went through. And then for that moment, I stepped into the shoes of Jesus. And I said, even though the Father allowed that to happen to Jesus, it doesn't mean that God doesn't love Jesus. But Jesus had to pass through all of those things. Why? So that for his sake, we might be saved. And then as I was passing through that, the woman was playing Mariah Carey's song. There's a hero. If you look inside of you, the portion of the Bible that said everything worked together for good. I just jumped up and I said I was all. And that was the beginning of my healing. You see, I may not have time to talk about the family system because that would take another 45 minutes. But at that point, I worked with a therapist. I worked with a lot of people. And then I realized that I had to forgive my father, not for him, but for me. So I don't know if you are here this morning. Maybe your father wasn't there for you. Maybe that your uncle that your parent brought into the house sexually abused you. And then you were like trying to tell your parents, and your parents weren't doing anything. Or your uncle was supposed to pay your school fees, and because of that, you couldn't go to school, you drop out of school. It doesn't matter. Because why? The thought that God has towards you, they are the thought of good and not of evil. To what? To give you what? An expected end. If I didn't pass through what I passed through, there are some cases that I handle and I wouldn't have been able to handle them. And now when I share my story, I am not ashamed. I am not hurting anymore because why? I left it at the cross of Calvary. So, I want us to just bow down on our heads. I want you to just go back to that time when you were traumatized. I want you to feel that emotion that you felt at that time. At that time, sometimes I felt like killing my own father. I felt like you should experience everything I experienced. Peradventure, your auntie made you do all manners of house chores. I want you to go back to that scene Experience that sin for a moment. And then in that, you seated and closing your eyes, I want you to just take a step further and just say, just as I am, Lord, help me. You are to forgive, but not because of them. You are to forgive because of yourself. Because trauma could result into cancer. Trauma could result into diabetes, migraine, high blood pressure. And when you experience all of those things, those people are not the ones experiencing it. Just let it go. Let it go. Because if we ever hope to bring more peace into our world, we must start by ending the emotional and physical violence that occurs in our homes. Thank you.